All right, everybody, welcome back to another session. Today, I have been working on a whole bunch of these blooming marbles. Some of them worked out better than others, but this one in particular had a really nice flow to it while I was making it. So this is the one that I'm going to share. And it all starts out by building up the marble from one end all the way to the other end. So we're going to add a little bit of glass to the end of a punty and make a collar. Cool that down for a second, and then I want to add another small bit of glass to it to form kind of like a post. So the whole thing becomes like a post for the marble. And now what I want to do is just get a good amount of glass hot that will serve as the bottom of the marble. Not a big amount, it's just kind of like a small pea size. But here's the important thing is that you want to just heat the ball on the end. So when you go to flatten it here, it doesn't press all the way back onto the mandrel. That's really important to have that little bit of space there so you know where the end of the marble is when you're all finished. Okay, so our very first pattern is going to be, we're doing a color fade. So I'm going to start with a dark red, or maybe it's a medium red, and I'm going to add 3 very small dots. Now, I should have used stringer. It would have been easier for me, but I had made several of these and had all these different stringers, and I don't know, I wanted to have something different, so I did this one with a normal size rod, which is doable. I did it, but I think it would be a lot easier with a stringer. Then you can it's easier to place the dot where you want to. So I have 3 dots here. You can start out with as many as you want. And what I'm going to do here is just warm my glass up in the back of the flame and then get a large dollop of glass, large enough to when you push it onto that pattern, it almost covers it. And then I'm just going to take a second to heat up just the clear on the very end and then come down and flatten it with my knife. On the quick side, you want to flatten it down so the glass pushes out as far as possible, but it still might not cover up every tip of the color. So on each one of these, after I have put the cap on it, the clear part, then I'm going to wrap a little bit of clear around the edge where that clear ends into the, what we're going to call a petal. And then I'm going to heat that up and flatten it a little bit more. Again, I'm only heating up what I have to. I'm not heating up the punty so much, except for when I need to, like when I'm getting different colors ready. I will always add a little heat to that punty. So now we are ready for the second layer. And I'm using a coral persimmon, I think. And I'm just going to go ahead and add my dots. I have a really hard time seeing what I'm doing here, so I did my best. Not all the dots came out perfectly, but in the long run, everything kind of seemed to work out together well. So I'm pulling these little dots in first, just to kind of bring them more towards the center. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just heating and pressing the dots. Notice I'm not heating up the punty when I'm doing this. I will heat up the punty, when I'm warming up other glass, like right here, just, a little bit here and there. If the punty cracks, make sure you heat it up real nice. Okay, so I'm going to heat up some of this clear. And I'm just going to get a nice amount ready to press down onto all these dots. And I'm going to try to press it right in the middle. And then just give it a good press and then pull and kind of, try to twirl the glass off there. And then it's the same thing. We're going to press just this top part down. And then where it kind of goes in and stops, that's where we're going to add our wrap of clear. And we're going to do this process over and over and over again until the marble is finished, or I have my 6 color fade finished on here. And it does take time. This marble probably took about an hour to finish. That's why in this session it's going a little faster. I do like to have my sessions going in normal speed, but because this one is kind of very repetitious, right here I'm adding a little bit of clear to the punty just to warm it up a little bit more. If I ever notice my punty cracking, sometimes I'll add just a little bit of hot glass to it to insulate it some more, and then continue what I'm doing, which is wrapping this little circle of glass here. Always takes forever, it seems, to do a full wrap. And then a little bit more flattening, and then continuing with our dot pattern. Last time that we talked, I was kind of talking about leaving graduate school and moving to Toledo. And, it was kind of fun because Toledo, it's in comparison to Texas where I grew up. Oh my gosh, it's so different. All the houses up here in the Midwest are just like so much older than what I was used to in Arlington where I grew up. And there's this one neighborhood that is kind of butts up right against where the museum is that I worked at. And the neighborhood is called the Old West End. And it is the biggest conglomeration of Victorian, Edwardian, and arts and crafts homes this side of the Mississippi. And it's just amazing. When I first drove into this neighborhood, I knew it. I was like, I don't want to live anywhere else but here in this neighborhood because it is just beautiful. We live in an arts and crafts home, but closer down, we're about a mile, almost an exact mile from our house to the museum. So it was really convenient when I started working there. And of course, this wasn't the first house we lived in. We lived in an apartment and then a couple different places in the Old West End until we decided to buy our home. And we live on Scottwood Avenue, therefore Scottwood Research, just in case any of you guys wanted to know. But yeah, working at the museum was amazing. I would work there just 2 hours in the morning, kind of cleaning up and, taking things out of the annealers. And then I would teach a class in the afternoon, like from 12 to 3. Oh, maybe it was 3 to 6. I think it was because it had to be after school because I taught the high school kids. And it was so much fun. I had a great time because for the first time I was teaching something that I felt like I knew something about, which is glass blowing. And not only the experience of teaching, but also being able to have, Patrick and I also had, what we call blow time. And we were able to get the last spot available, which was like a 9 to midnight spot on a Friday night that nobody wanted. And we're like, we'll take that spot. So everybody, it was like a mom and pop shop. It was it was also partly ceramics, the building that we were in, and it was not in the museum. It was right next to the museum. Kind of like, I don't know, like this, not really a gem or anything, just the hot shop. But it was great. I really enjoyed being there. It was, it was so much more personable and fun to be in that studio before moving into the glass pavilion that is there now. But the cool thing about that original studio is that back in, 1962, the very first, and I didn't know this until I, moved to Toledo and started working at the hot shop at the museum, but the very first experimental glass workshop was held right there at the museum in 1962 with Harvey Littleton, Dominic Labino, I think Fritz Dreisbach, and a handful of other well-known glass artists. And I had no idea. And I was like, wow, that's so cool that all that happened here. In fact, I was really surprised at the history of the glass in Ohio, specifically up here in that Toledo area. There's also Tiffin glass, and of course there's the Libby glass that's big here. And the Libbys were the ones who started the museum, the Toledo Museum of Art. And the Libby house is right outside of the Toledo Museum of Art in the Old West End, and it's a beautiful house, really unbelievable. Yeah. So the beginning of the glass movement, the studio movement started here in Toledo. I just think that's so crazy that's where I ended up. Anyway, so yeah, working at the museum was a lot of fun. Patrick and I, we cranked out a whole bunch of glass, and we worked together really well in the studio. We kind of just teamed up, and we made a ton of work. We did a whole bunch of the art shows, did the circuit, and several times a year. We opened up our house in December and had big glass shows and stuff, and we did really well. It was tiring, though. It was exhausting. And I just always wondered, how much longer am I going to be able to take this heat? But in that old studio, we had big fans and everything, and you could kind of cool down. And, it was so much more like relaxed than what happened when that studio shut down and we moved into a big, new, fancy museum. But anyway, I also started flameworking there in that small museum. The head of the glass, area at the museum at the time, he wanted to start a flameworking program. So I helped him, kind of build this big long table and, kind of figure everything out. And then all of a sudden we get torches in and oxygen. And the first weekend we had another person from Michigan come in and teach some of the classes for flameworking, and I decided, well, I've got to try this again, so I'm going to take this weekend workshop. And I found that it was soft glass, and I'd never worked with soft glass, only boro. And I really feel like I picked up well using the soft glass in flameworking. And I have to say, I had the best time in that workshop. I was cranking out beads left and right, just, not really, necessarily caring whether they were perfectly round or not, but just mesmerized by the whole process of being able to flame work, and just, in a just by sitting down and working, not moving and hauling all this heavy glass, and you got 75 pounds of glass on the end of your pipe. It's so much nicer to scale down like this. And I just really was attracted to the whole process and was like, I've got to do this at home. And within a couple years, I had a small torch, just your basic minor burner, and small tank of oxygen, propane, and I was set up in our house. And we had a nice big basement that we were renting a house, or half of a house here, from a friend of ours, and the basement was huge, so I had a little small setup in the basement and was able to just practice. And within about a year or so, I was able to start teaching the flameworking classes as well, just the beginning flameworking, and I kind of went from there. I always felt like teaching glass, especially flameworking, was, just working with other students and people who were new at the process, the ideas that they came up with and the things that they were asking me, well, can you make this? Can you show us this? That was the best part about it, because it was like very challenging, but also very satisfying to, be able to say like, oh yeah, you want to learn how to make a mushroom? Okay, we'll do that next week. And then I would spend all week, in the dungeon learning myself how to make a mushroom just so I could teach it in the next class. So it was many, many years of that. And I just really appreciated the time that I was allowed there to just grow, not only as a person, but as a glass artist. I really kind of feel like I came into, my own kind of thing. I got my own rhythm, my own kind of style, like everything kind of started to fall into place. And then what else happened there? The museum always had this great yearly show. They don't do it anymore. I don't know why, but it was a yearly show that the museum did called the Toledo Area Artist Show. And every show, all of our art friends and everybody would enter, all these pieces, and we would be able to show our work at the museum. And it was so much fun to do that, especially when you got in and then you got to go to the opening. And there was one year, I think it was 2011 or 12, just a few years before I exited the museum, that I won an award, a pretty substantial award at the Toledo Area Artist Show at the museum, and it was called the Dominic Labino Award, and it was for the best glass piece at the show, and I won that award. I was so happy. And then maybe 6 months later, I was showing that piece at a local gallery downtown, and there was a big opening, and somebody bumped the table that the piece was on, and it shattered into like 1,000,000 trillion pieces, and I was just devastated. But what are you gonna do? Glass breaks. It was thinking about it now makes me so sad and kind of mad too, but what happens? The gallery didn't pay me back. They gave me a little bit of, there was a hot shop attached to that gallery, so I ended up getting a little bit of blow time to make up for the damage, but it didn't really make up for anything as far as I was concerned. So now it's like the last time I really showed any artwork. I have always had the fear of not showing my work, but breaking my work. Everything always breaking and shattering, and me making all this cool, fun stuff, and then how am I going to transport it? Where am I going to put it? What if it breaks? So it just hangs out here in the dungeon, and every now and then I'll look at it and walk away. Maybe someday I'll take pictures of all my work and share it with you all. So I was at that, we were in that little, hot shop, for several years, I think like 5 or 6 years, at least when I was there. The shop had been there since the 60s, but, I was there, and maybe, I can't remember, 2010, 11, maybe is when we moved into the new glass pavilion, and, that's when everything changed for me. Everything changed about the art, the glass, it was like a downhill spiral, I guess you would say. But I was able to meet quite a few really great artists that came through to do workshops and demonstrations at the museum. People, like I was saying, Fritz Dreisbach. Oop, I messed up on this one a little bit. I'm going to break that bit of glass off. This is the last layer, by the way. But I met a lot of people like Fritz Dreisbach, Shane Farrow, Dan Daly came in, of course, Lucio Bubacco and Davide Salvatore, Lino, Gianni Toso, and a ton of other people. And it was just really cool to be able to see and to meet, other glass artists who were very well known, and to see how they work, and, how they were as just a person. And I mean, 99% of them were just so amazing and the nicest people. It was really the local people who were renting time, not even the local people, but when the museum, when it became the pavilion, it was, I don't know. I loved it and I hated it. It was like I felt like I was working in the most beautiful building in the world, but it was like stepping into hell every day. Oh, but I had some really, really good times. And I will say it was the best of times and the worst of times, as the book states. Anyway, let's get back into the end of this marble, and we will continue our story in another session. So I am just finishing up with all these layers, and this is the last bit of clear I'm going to add here. Just a nice dollop of clear right over those last little dots. And then I'm going to press this down and do what I did before, add a little bit of clear around the edge there. And if you have been noticing that I'm also flashing my puntee, as often as I can during this whole process. The other thing I noticed during this process was when about halfway through, I noticed that the glass rod I was using seemed to be very seedy. And I was kind of not happy. I was like, oh man, really? And of course, when I'm making this, I'm also like, have no oxygen left. Like at the end of my tank here. So I'm like, well, instead of starting all over, I'm just going to use this glass throughout the whole thing, and then the whole piece will be just a seedy, marble. I did like the way it looked, though. I didn't mind that kind of fizzy, bubbly effect, but I got lucky. Because this day after I took the final photos of this marble and all my other ones that I kind of my experiments. This one in particular completely shattered. I opened up my box that it was in, and it's not in pieces. It's still round, but it's just full of little shatters. So I'm so happy that I was able to get the pictures of this marble before it destroyed itself. I guess it just didn't like that many bubbles in there. Anyway, now that we're done like building up this whole marble, and I hope you like the way this was all done. You can use less layers, more layers, less clear, more clear. You could add dots instead of a big dot of clear. You could add small dots over the colors. I just like to add that big amount of clear because that kind of widens the layers between each other here. So it just looks really, really cool. And this is where I started getting excited because I could finally see everything that was going on in here. Okay, so now that we have our marble ready, I'm just going to kind of fire polish the whole outside and warm it up. And now I am going to try to very gently push my tungsten pick and kind of turn the marble back and forth so it's not falling down as you do this. You want to stay right in the center as you push your pick as far in as you can go. Try not to get all the way to the end, but close to the end. And then I'm just going to kind of flatten that top out. And now we have a completely different kind of compressed shape here. And now what I want to do is add a little bit of clear right to the top to close off that little area. And I don't think that this pocket of air was so big that that's what made everything kind of crack up later on, because the action of me heating up the marble on the side, pushes a little bit of that air out. Anyway, so I'm going to add a little bit of glass to cover that up and to finish that end of the marble. And then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get my puntee ready there in a way. All right, now we're going to start to reshape this whole thing. I'm heating the top up, a lot of heat in the top, and then I'm going to switch to the bottom side. And this is where I find things kind of important. The part that's touching the puntee is kind of the most important part for me right now to shape. So I'm trying to get as much heat as I can underneath it, but not right on the punty. So when I go into the mold here, I'm pulling down. I'm pulling down towards the bottom. So you see the whole bottom part is starting to get a nice curve to it. I'm just kind of pulling right where that punty mark is and pushing down to create that curve. It's kind of a weird angle, but it really works out well. I'm going to do that again here in a second. I'm just kind of pulling to create that nice bottom, like I'm working the bottom hemisphere right now. I'm not worried about what's going on the top yet. I will here in a second, as soon as I like the way this looks, and I think that looks good. So I'm going to flip my marble around so I can get a better heat on the top. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to just shape the whole marble up using a marble mold that has several different sizes. And I'm going to start out by just heating everything up. You know how I like to talk about when glass is hot and you're turning it evenly, it wants to do nothing but round out. That's all the glass wants to do. When it's happy, it wants to round out. So if you're turning nice and evenly, the glass should almost round itself out. And before I go into this mold, I make sure that the skin of the marble is much cooler than the inside. That will ensure that my glass does not buckle up and trip on itself when I am rolling in the mold. And now here, I'm going to start on the cooler side of my marble, the bottom side, and work into the top. But I am turning the mold more than I'm turning the marble. So I like to hold the marble mold in my hand sometimes and turn the mold instead of trying to take my marble. I never round out the marble straight up and down. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I'm always rounding it out on the side. All right, so here I am. I'm heating up the bottom side. And I'm just rounding everything out. I'm going to eyeball this whole thing here. I like the way this looks. So now, as the marble is cooling down, the marble has to be on the cooler side. I'm going to roll my punty out, give it a second to cool as well, and then very gently touch the top of the marble. And I want to feel it kind of on the stiff side. If it's soft, it's going to be difficult to take off. You may have issues. But if it's on the stiff side, that's when you know it's creating a temporary connection. And that's going to allow me to hang on to this and then just get some heat onto the top punty and very gently pull that out. And I really don't have to add any more here. You might need to add a little bit more if there's a, kind of a divot on the top side. But I think that everything is looking really good here. And I'm just going to work on the bottom or the top hemisphere, whatever you want to call it, and just round that out to even out the whole round of everything. And then just give it a little turn in the mold. And I do this until I feel like in my hand that it is nice and round and smooth. And that is our marble. I love the way this looks, you guys. I hope you enjoy the final pictures. I have a couple other ones that turned out pretty good. Now, this one came off like butter, like perfect. And then, and then it falls. Of course. So here am I. I'm panicking. My heart's like racing. I'm stressing. And I grab my spoon, which is the perfect thing. Have your spoon on hand just in case. And then I'm going to straighten it up and very quickly fire polish it and put it away. And with that said, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time in the dungeon.